So, hello everyone. Thank you very much, Niklas, for being here. I would like to thank, of course, the students that manage this invitation, and so Niklas, you are head of museum in Museum of Games in Tampere, in Finland. You are as well members of FGAMP, which is the Federation of Preservation of Electronic and Video Game Heritage. You are a PhD. Maybe you will. I will present you the context, and maybe you can complete the your profile by yourself if are missing some elements. So ViaLab is a Videogames in Art Laboratory, and we already invited several. So the main problematic is to question the relation toward art and in video games, or video games in art. Not especially through only through the spectrum of video game developers or video game industry, but mostly how video games are influencing practices in cultural fields. So we had curators, we had, of course, video game developers, but we had as well intermedia artists. I will not make the list of all the guests we had, but I think it was very nice occasion to have you, as was part of your main concern toward that topic, especially toward the video games. That's the problematics, I guess, that are part of the video games, the Museum of Games in Tampere. So Niklas, welcome, and it's your turn. So maybe after the discussion, a second part will be reserved for questions to complete the topic. It's your turn, Niklas.
Thank you so much. So hi all. Nice to be here. My name is Niklas, and I'm going to talk about video games as we see them at the Finnish Museum of Games. Not just about preserving them, but also about exhibiting them. And let's see where the slides take us. But I think I have roughly half an hour of time to finish the talk, and then we can have questions, and I'm super happy to try answer them, and please ask away. But maybe first a couple of words about me. I work as a researcher at the Finnish Museum of Games, and we are part of a larger organization called the Tampere Historical Museums. And we have our exhibitions at Vapriki Museum Center, which is quite a big museum center in the city. As Camille said, I also have a PhD from Tampere University dealing especially with games as heritage. And I guess that puts a specific spin on why I look at games in the way that I do. I've been a museum worker for about 10 years, a bit more. And during that time span, I've been working both with exhibitions, but also collections, and I guess also events in different ways. The biggest exhibitions I've been working on have been dealing with media history, with postal history, and also game history now. And the latest one we did that opened last year, a little bit bigger exhibition, was the Fantastic Failure exhibition that deals specifically with the Nokia N-Gage gaming device. And it was a very interesting project because we put the failure of the device in the center, and that allowed us to well, talk about it in a specific way, but also see things that maybe otherwise would have been very difficult to see. So my title is not a curator, but of course I also do curatorial work. I put together exhibitions. I do a lot of decisions, and as the, I guess, ironic meme on the right kind of puts it in the way that I'm kind of, as a curator, I'm responsible for choosing what goes into an exhibition. So the Finnish Museum of Games is located in Tampere, the second largest city in Finland, roughly 2 hours from Helsinki, the capital. And our exhibition space is about 400 square meters in a fairly big museum center that also has about 10 to 15 different exhibitions or other exhibitions. It's dealing specifically with Finnish games. So we have a selection of 100 Finnish games because we opened during the 100th anniversary of Finland, and it kind of felt topical and good to have a selection like that. And dealing specifically with Finnish games and having quite a broad selection allowed us to also look at quite interesting things about Finnish game history. Not only the sort of best-selling titles, the biggest brands like Clash of Clans and Angry Birds and Max Payne and other Alan Wake and other games by the big companies, but also other types of games. So we also have board games, we have role-playing games, we have card games, live-action role-playing games, and also video games, digital games that haven't really been that successful or haven't really had this multi-million audience, international audience, but more like non-commercial games, games people do for fun, games people make for themselves and their friends for enjoyment, or maybe even games that were never released, that were or games that were failures in one way or another. So it's quite a wide selection, and later on we're going to look at a couple of examples from that selection as well. Our museum mostly has playable games, so most of the games on display are also playable. Uh, so all in all, there's roughly 85 playable games. I think it's a bit more at the moment because we have two small changing exhibitions and also the Fantastic Failure exhibition. So I think it's closer to 100 if you look at all the exhibitions that we have on display. In the Finnish Museum of Games, there's also 6 thematic rooms. You can see 2 examples on the left. So we built these environments where the visitors are able to go to specific time periods. Like in the example above, there's a Commodore 64 from 1985 when it came to Finland. It became a huge hit with teenagers and especially young boys. So we built and furnished this room where visitors can go inside and they can interact with the objects. And it's not only about the game, it's also about the environment. There's another example below where you can see another thematic room that deals with game stores. And the idea behind this was that game stores are disappearing. So we wanted to kind of preserve a game store also in the museum. We also have a video game arcade with about 15 playable arcade games, not necessarily made in Finland, but almost all of them have some kind of history in Finland. So they have been in use in Finnish amusement parks, in traveling amusement fairs, and on the ferries that go between Finland and Sweden. And as said, we also do changing exhibitions and have in different sizes. So those also kind of vary the selection a little bit year to year. We have been awarded some prizes as well, and I'm super proud to also tell a little bit about this. In the center, you can see my colleague Oti holding up a prize for the Game Educator of the Year in 2017. We were awarded also the Geek Girl Act of the Year 2017 and the Sensation of the Year from the Finnish game industry, Finnish Game Awards. and we also got an international prize from the Dibner or the Dibner Award for Excellence in Museum Exhibits in 2018. So yes, sort of today I want to talk about preservation, but also exhibiting games, and I guess in this context, it's quite interesting that most of the game museums around the world have originally been hobbyist collections, I guess. So game preservation, game exhibiting have mostly been done by hobbyists, not museum professionals, but people who have had an interest in games and have wanted to develop that interest into an exhibition as well. There's an image of the Computerspiele Museum in Berlin on the lower right. There's some other images from specifically from Finland, from kind of like the early stages of Finnish game exhibitions, and the first ones go back to 2001, and those exhibitions were done by a group called the Pelikone Peijonit, which is a collector group, and they were also very influential in setting up the Finnish Museum of Games roughly 15 years later. So I guess, well, and the interesting part for me is coming from the museum field is that the game enthusiasts have to a large part already kind of solved a lot of questions related to exhibiting games. They have been sort of interested themselves in trying to showcase this, in trying to sort of figure out what's important about games. And for me as a museum professional, of course, it's been a very good situation that I've been able to sort of build on the work that these hobbyists and have already done. And I guess the situation is quite similar in many other European countries and probably around the world, that the hobbyists are still in a very key and central role in figuring out what is important, what should be exhibited, how can it be exhibited, and how can it be also be preserved. Um, so and this activity has not only been in exhibitions but also online and in different hobby spheres, and I think it's very interesting to kind of look a little bit more closely at this history and look at the different databases and popular histories that have been built already during 20 or 25 years. So there's a term called called rogue archives that comes from the Kostnik's work in 2016, and it talks about, or it means these archives online that are rogue in the sense that they have not necessarily any kind of permission to set up these databases. They don't have any permission to share the files that they often share, and they are kind of operating at least in the gray area of the law, or even breaking copyright law. Uh, Also, in the sort of Finnish context, as said, the situation where we started putting up an exhibition, there was already a lot of work done by hobbyists and popular scholars, and we were able to build on this. Also, in the sort of preservation area, there was a lot of work done by hobbyists, because the sort of main issues with running old games had already been solved, or were solved at the time we were starting to set up our museum, and we were in a very happy place with that, because we were able to build upon this knowledge, to build upon these solutions that were already coming from the hobbyist field. So there were already a lot of emulation systems in place. Many of the kind of key uh, home computers platforms were already emulated. So in a situation like that, it's quite fairly easy to run the old games with modern machines. Uh, there was a lot of work done, or also with uh, prototyping and building new systems that are often called simulation. systems, FPGAs, meaning that, for example, a Commodore 64 can be produced with modern parts, modern electronics. It doesn't necessarily look like a Commodore 64, but in practice, it functions like one. So you can have a fairly small machine that in a sort of electronic sense is the same machine as the original, and this already solves a lot of issues related to exhibiting or preserving games, because as we know, electronics, and especially fairly cheap electronics, don't necessarily hold up for all the decades that we would want them to hold up. So uh, for example, the Commodore 64, which is already over 40 years old, the original machines are getting quite old, and if you wanted to put up an entire museum exhibition with them, you would need to have, like, I guess, dozens of machines, because they would of course break. But the way we solve it at the museum is that we have these simulation FPGA uh, systems called, for example, the Turbo Chameleon 64, that we can use to show all the Commodore 64 games we have. So the solution, or the situation, was kind of in many ways very fruitful and very good, because the hobbyist scene, the retro gaming scene, had already solved a lot of things. But something that we realized that when we were putting up the exhibition was that there's also potential blind spots where when hobbyists are starting to write histories, are starting to build up an understanding what constitutes game heritage. So first of all, hobbyist collectors, retro gamers, are often most interested in the sort of successful big brands that exist, things that they remember themselves. So the Commodore 64 is very well preserved, but also you can see Nintendo ROMs or PlayStation ROMs, so the Dreamcast ROMs floating around on the internet, and of course people are very attached to brands like Pac-Man or Mario or things like this. And there's a lot of focus also on the sort of technical side of games. People want to play all games, and they see game preservation, even game heritage, as a kind of uh, technical problem that needs to be solved. And in that situation, it's quite easy to sort of overlook all the other aspects related to game history. Um and also because these people that have mostly been interested in game preservation, the hobbyists, have a fairly unified background. Uh, they are nowadays people in their 40s and 50s. Many of them are men from the sort of Western countries, well-to-do, affluent countries. So maybe for them it's not that easy to sort of see beyond this shared generational experience that they have, and to start looking at other types of games, or even artifacts related to games. So, and also maybe as a last point, if you talk with game collectors, game hobbyists, retro gamers, they are maybe not that eager to sort of engage critically with games, but are more often kind of interested in sort of showing, remembering the good things about them. So kind of these things became quite clear when we started working on the exhibition. And of course, coming from the museum sector, maybe we had more tools for dealing in a critical way of also with this history. So if you look at it critically, it's kind of becomes clear that the retro gaming scene isn't that interested in other things than the big brands and the playable games. So they don't really want to engage with players. They don't really want to understand the oral histories, the experiences, the life stories of players, and the places and memories of play. Uh, and because they don't really want to shine a critical light on the topic, maybe they don't want to or it's more difficult for them to kind of see the role that players and communities have in making content in modern game environments, where maybe if you look at it in a more critical way, you can also see that actually these players are building up these communities, building up these games even, and still they don't really have a legal part in their ownership. So, and also sort of extending on this, hobbyist community or hobbyist collectors haven't maybe been that interested in preserving or looking at the different intangible parts of game history, of game heritage. They haven't been interested in looking at the skills and values associated with games, for example, or the tensions and problems that we all know that exist in game cultures, or as said about the ownership of virtual worlds, for example. Is it really the company who owns the IP of a virtual world that owns it, or should players and the communities that actually function and live in those communities, should they also have some kind of ownership attributed to them? So, kind of coming from the museum sector, I think it's also fruitful to sort of understand what we are quite good at, what museum professionals have been doing for, I guess, centuries already, and at least decades in a more organized and systematic way. So we have quite a good and versatile tool set when we look at different uh, historical phenomena, and these can be also applied to games. So we can interview people, we can interview players, we can interview game developers, we can collect photographies of people playing. We can actually go in and take photographs, we can do video recorders, etc., etc. We can collect people's oral histories and memories, and I think that also applies, and it has a place also when we talk about games. It's a well tested method of preserving the past, and it also works in the game field. We can also take a more critical approach to the topic. We can be reflexive in the way that we actually think about who is kind of uh, who is defining what's important about the past. Is it, should it really be the retro gamers in the sense that we talked about them a couple of slides ago? Should we actually be more aware of who is defining what is important, what are the important platform, what are the important games, etc. And I think like museums can have the potential to ask these difficult questions, and also maybe be active in the way that they also engage with other people who would otherwise be silenced in this discussion. And maybe also, and I think this is probably the most important for the discussion we are having now, museums can also understand that it's not always just the playable game that is important when you look at game history and game heritage, because there's all kinds of other things you could show as well related to games: retail boxes, game devices, controllers, storage media, but also maybe player made notes, wikis online, just random bits of paper, or if you talk with game designers, they will probably have all kinds of design materials in their collections. We can interview people both playing and making these games. We can preserve and put on display, for example, concept art related to games, or photographs of people playing, or we could even exhibit fan art related to games and sort of go beyond the game as a commercial product and start seeing it more as a part of people's lives, and something that they actively engage with. So there's all kinds of possibilities, and I think these possibilities should also be taken into account when we start preserving and also exhibiting games. And I guess the point here is that we can exhibit games even if they're not playable, just by looking at all these other things related to them, to these paratexts and metatexts, if you want to use the terminology of Genet. And I guess the key question here is, why should the focus be on playable games? And I'm not saying that playing games is bad. I think it's a wonderful way of engaging with the past, and it's very informative also in a game exhibition. People can play games that they aren't familiar with, but when they do that, there's going to be all kinds of problems, because it's not that always that clear how to play a game that's, I guess, for example, 40 or 50 years old, because those games might be from entire genres that don't really exist anymore, and understanding how to play them requires a lot of cultural context and social know-how. So yes, so kind of asking critical questions, looking at the topic in a critical way, helps us to understand that games aren't necessarily that different from other forms of culture. We can, and maybe in cases should also exhibit them in the same way that we are exhibiting other things in cultural history museums. So they necessarily aren't that different. And kind of when we understand this, that there's other different ways of exhibiting and preserving games, we kind of understand that it's also about choices. It's about the curatorial choices that we do when we put up exhibitions, when we build displays of games. Uh, this image is from an article I wrote a couple of years ago already, and I actually expanded on this in my PhD. But this is kind of like a bare bones example of what I'm talking about. So 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 games aren't just playable; they're not just experiences, but they also have a materiality attached to them. They are also objects in the sense that they are retail boxes or machines that the games are played on, or they're even like player made content, like paper notes and stuff like that. Uh, and there's a lot of social context to games that you need to have a lot of knowledge, social knowledge, know-how to be able to play them, and this needs to come into account also when you put up an exhibition, because all players might not necessarily have that same know-how that the original players had. So maybe it's important to sort of talk about this, to explain visitors, to interpret the old games in different ways, to in museum texts, or even making videos explaining why a particular or why a particular game in the 80s was played in the way it was, or why that game even exists. Because for a modern teenager, it might not be apparent why a game like, for example, a maze adventure from the 80s even existed, and what the point was. And with a maze adventure, mean a game where when you're walking in a sort of maze environment, kind of in an FPS type of way, but it's not really an action game. It's more like a puzzle game, because you need to map out that maze, and that the mapping out is done on paper, on graph paper. And if you don't know this, the game probably won't tell you that you need to map your progress. But every player in the approaching that game in the 80s would know this from all the other social knowledge they had. So in the end, games are kind of like assemblages that it's very difficult to, in the end, to say what the actual game here is, because the game kind of exists in so many different places. It can exist uh, in the activity of play, but it can also exist without that. So we can look at old retail boxes, old storage media, and kind of still understand that this is a game and what kind of game it is, just by talking, by sharing knowledge. And again, this is how history and heritage work. works. We don't really need to go into an archaeological museum and try out the old stone axes they have on display, and we can't even do that. But we can still kind of understand what it means to be to work with stone tools instead of steel tools, for example. We kind of have these frameworks, these cultural frameworks and contexts to do that. And I think the same thing applies to games. So yes, maybe to wrap up a little bit, we can look at a couple of examples from our museums. So I told you earlier that we have 100 games on display at the museum, and these are now two examples. And these aren't just random examples; they're examples that I picked because I think here it kind of works the way that I theoretically explained. It kind of works in a nice way because kind of in a perfect situation, I think we should have displays like this of all the 100 games that we have in the museum. So I don't know if you can see my mouse, but sort of you see here that we have a playable game on display. For example, in Unreal World and the ice fishing game Propilki. So you can try out those games, but it's not just that. It's also other things. Trying out playing the game is not the whole experience in the museum. There's all kinds of different materials as well. So so the playable games exist. As you can see, they are not using the original hardware in the sense that you would be interacting with an old PC computer, but it's more user friendly towards the museum visitor. Everything is kind of presented in the same way, and we are trying to make it as simple for the visitors as possible. So we're not aiming to in these cases to set the visitor in a sort of thematic environment, but more to talk about the games as works of design, as works of art that exist side by side, and you can which you can kind of compare to each other. So Unreal World is a game that's actually in the Guinness Book of World Records because it's the longest continually developed game in the world. It's a video game made by Sami Maren and his friend Erkka Lehmis, who you can maybe just see in the small interview video we have. Sami is on the left and Erkka is on the right. They have been developing this game since teenagers, since they were 16, and it's been continually developed after that. There's been patches and versions coming out every year, which kind of makes it different from for example NetHack, that has had long periods of silence also in the development process. So every year there's been new updates and often quite many updates as well. It's a game that is set in a fantasy version of Iron Age Finland. So you uh, move around in a fantastic version of Finland, and you try to survive. It's the survivalist game, and you try to do that by using the skills and knowledge that Iron Age Finch maybe would have, and also the skills and knowledge that Sami and Erkka, both being history uh, hobbyists, kind of know how to use how to make your own fire, how to make your own arrows, etc., etc. So we have the playable game, but there's also a text above that that kind of explains why this game is important, why what the kind of highlights are, what should maybe be known about the game like this. But there's also other stuff. We also already talked about the interview we already have here with the designers. The designers were also active in making this presentation in this display in the way that they chose which version of the game is in display, and they also chose all the materials that are also on display. And above the interview, you can see, well, you can't really read them in the presentation, but there's all kinds of development materials, papers, kind of random papers from the early stages of the game, where different game systems are written out, or there's a couple of examples of player feedback that active players have sent the developers and which they wanted to show here. Below the interview, you can see some objects from also Erkas and Sami's collection. There's a piece of fur, I guess it's called, which came from a fan in living in Canada who had been playing this game for years and years and who was an avid fan, and they used this, I guess, quite archaic way of payment to pay for a licensed version of the game. There's other objects as well. There's a piece of flint which you can use to make a fire, and it's something that Sami has himself built, and it's also modeled in the game. And there's also the arrows I talked about, and also a drum associated with the kind of mystical magic system of the game. So it's quite a varied display, as is the other display on the other side, the display of the Propilkki, which is an ice fishing game that was originally came out in 1999. In this case as well, there is the playable game. You can try out the newer version of the game. There's a text again. There's an interview, and then there's a display case with physical objects. There's the this is also a game that was developed by two friends, and on display you can see an actual ice fishing rod that Mikko Happo, one of the designers, got as a present from his grandfather when he was very young, is 6 years old, and that was kind of his start in ice fishing, because the game was developed by Mikko Happo and Janne Olkkonen, who live quite far in Kajaani region, in quite north in Finland, where according to them, there wasn't really that much to do when they were growing up. They had an interest in computers and they had an interest in ice fishing, and both of those kind of came together in this game. So there's the ice fishing rod, which is actually modeled also in the game. You can maybe just about see it. And then there's a computer that Mikko made, used for making the graphics of the game. Above that, you can see, or maybe just make out a display case with cards, because this was a game that was a cardware game, and cardware games don't really exist anymore, but that was quite a popular way of sharing your games online in the late 90s and early 2000s. It was a kind of like a shareware game where you could download the game for free, but in this case the people downloading it didn't pay any money, but the developers asked them to send a card in exchange if they played the game, downloaded the game, played the game, and enjoyed it. So the friends Mikko and Janne have a huge collection of over, or had a huge collection of over 200 postcards from all over the world, and they donated to the museums. And here we showcase just a small bit of that, and it really shows how people have loved this game and how they have played it, and also kind of showcases the relationship of the designers and the play community already 20 or 25 years ago. So yes, these are just some examples of displays at the museum, and as I said, there's 100 games like this, and sort of what I'm trying to say here is that I think it's very important also to show the other things than just the playable games, to show the ideas of the designers, or maybe the players, if we have the opportunity, to also show all the game design related materials that we have on display here, but also show the relationship that actual players have with the game. And all this kind of makes for a very much more nuanced understanding of what historical games are, and maybe we can use a term like holistic preservation for something like this. So just maybe wrapping up, his table I made for an article that also came a couple of years ago, and kind of tried to map these objects into the image I showed you earlier, where we can kind of look at games as experiences, games as objects, but also the context of the game, the context of play, the context of development, and the context of reception. For example, these are not absolute categories. These are just tools for sort of mapping out how broad or how holistic a particular display is. So, for example, in the case of ProPilkki that we just looked at, we can see that we have sort of ticks in most of these boxes. And of course, it's also an issue related to resources. Is it really possible to show all games in a such a wide manner, or is it even possible? Because in many cases, for example, in the case of Supernauts, which was also an online game from Finland, we can't really show the playable game anymore at this stage. So there's all kinds of affordances related to these games, like budget affordances, how varied displays can be made, but also the games themselves have affordances related to what can be displayed, or there's also all kinds of affordances related to the fact whether we can be in contact with the original developers, whether they want to engage in or help out in exhibiting and preserving these games. So I guess with that, I want to thank you for listening. And as said, I'm also super happy to discuss and try to answer questions. I hope I didn't use up too much of time, and that we still have some time left for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niklas. We are absolutely not in a hurry.
I think I'll stop sharing now because I want to see your faces as well. So I hope that's okay. Let's see. Maybe like
I
this.
have questions, but I would prefer like maybe first Sven, maybe. Oh, yes.
Well, it's certainly more impressive than what we have as a video game museum.
Thank you.
No, I mean, it's something, but
But okay, well, let's take it as. But do you have a question?
Alan Wake and Max Payne are both finished then?
Yeah, they are. Yeah. It's Remedy, the company that made them, is a company. It's actually one of the oldest kind of big game companies in Finland. They started out in the early 90s as actually like as a demo scene group. And I don't know if you are familiar with the demo scene, but I think that's also an interesting part of game history, and something that we could maybe talk about here as well, because the demo scene is well, I guess it's a community of people, like usually very skilled users of computers who kind of compete with each other in making demos, as they're called, programs that are run in real time, and they come together in different parties, demo parties, where these competitions are held. And Future Crew was one such demo group in the early 90s on the making, or they were kind of like the first demo group that actually made very nice looking demos on PCs. And you can see them on YouTube. Of course, that's not the original program. It's a recording of what the program does. But they made really nice looking, very skillfully made demos, and they had a very good reputation also in a sort of European-wide or even worldwide. People remember them for making these very awesome, technically awesome demos. And at some point, they realized that the skills that they were using as demo makers were the same that you kind of could use to make games. And they started up their first company, or their company called Remedy, and started making games. And Remedy is you can kind of see the connection to the demo scene in the fact that they don't use proprietary engines for making their games. They don't use Unity or Unreal Engine or anything like that. They build their own tech, and that kind of sets them apart from many other companies nowadays. And I guess they have a very good reputation with the games that they have made. So that was a very long answer to a simple question. Yes, they both Max Payne and Alan Wake are Finnish games.
Good, interesting connection. I have several, so I don't know yet if it's remarks or questions, but what is interesting us as well, like, so that's, I would say, like this, you mentioned at the beginning, like toward your research and as well the way how to think exhibition design in such a context. Like from where, so I guess there was your personal experience, but like, did you had like some, because you are not working alone as well, you have a team around you with people with as well like different backgrounds, and like, do you have like did you compare, or like did you use elements or tools of scenography or exhibition design from other museums or exhibitions that you as well, like that you that was like useful for you, or like is it like it's coming from more from classic museums, because here we are in a very specific way. Not, I would say that nowadays, like almost many museums are interactive. Like we didn't had to wait video games in museums to be interactive. But yeah, so did you use art institutions or museum exhibiting art as a tool to help you in the to think the objects that gonna be installed in the museum?
I guess that as well. We had a very good exhibition designer when setting up the Finnish Museum of Games. So the exhibition designer actually came from the Science Center Heureka in Helsinki, or Vantaa, I think it's actually in. So and they had a lot of experience making interactive exhibitions, and it really helped in sort of solving these questions related to what is durable in an exhibition. How because we have like 200,000 visitors each year, so there's a lot of stress on the devices and the tech and everything in there. So they had a lot of solutions for that. So I think it's kind of like a combination of sort of how maybe cultural history museum professionals and our team kind of saw games as well, in a holistic sense, in the way that we wanted to present all kinds of materials related to them, and how this architect was able to sort of present that in a way that visitors could actually grasp and have a interact with in a nice way. And I guess like art exhibitions as well, because there's quite a lot of different art materials in the way that we are showcasing game design materials or concept art, etc. So which are then presented in kind of like a art museum-ish way. And we also made some changing exhibitions dealing specifically with art in, for example, the demo scene, or art of a specific game or something like that. Yeah, sort of looking at the chat, I see that there's another question. There's a cultural question. What's up with the Finnish obsession with the casino machines? I've seen them in almost any bigger shop, even outside Helsinki. Yes, yes, good question. Yes, so kind of low stakes gambling, like gambling with only a couple of euros or markas before the Euro period, has been quite a big phenomena in Finland. But it's going away because legislation has changed, and now if you want to play gambling casino machines, you need to actually register online, and not that many people want to do that. So it's sort of, we had this kind of nice culture, I guess, of low stakes gambling in most shops and bars and what's it called, like gas stations, where people often, when they made their purchases, they put, if they got a couple of extra coins, they put it in the machine and play. And that has been very, I guess, important element of Finnish culture as well. It's been a fun thing, and it's been there's been a monopoly for on this state-owned monopoly run by RAY, which now merged into Veikkaus, for since the 20s or 30s, 1920s or 1930s. So they were the only ones that were allowed to operate these kinds of machines, and they designed their own machines. And there's a couple of examples that were really kind of loved by Finns, and everybody knew them, like the Pajazzo games that we have at the museums, or the pokery games, which we also have at the museum. So kind of really nice designs that were also exported to some other countries because they worked so well and were so fun to play. And I guess the thing here is that with machines like this, of course, you can have a gambling problem, but because the stakes are very low, it's more of a pastime than actual gambling, where you're playing like for hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of euros. So kind of many people like this, and many people kind of did their own low stakes gambling. And I guess it was somewhat similar also in England and in the UK. And I recently met with Alan Meads, who's been researching this in England, and he also kind of talked in a very warm way about the sort of importance, the social importance of low stakes gambling. That's not only, gambling is not only kind of like a problem, but it's also a social glue for people to sort of come together over. And I think that's a fair point, especially now when the gambling law in Finland has been changed, and it's much stricter, and you don't really see these people who are social gamblers in the way that they just put a couple of euros. The people playing now are probably the ones who are actually have a or are more on the sort of problem side on this. So registering or putting up the legislation that you need to register in order to play didn't really solve the sort of actual problem of people spending way too money on gambling. And it doesn't really solve that for online gambling either, because that's where the real problems arise. But it, at the same time, it took away this quite nice and socially acceptable, and maybe even positive influence of this low stakes gambling. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's a good question, and it's kind of, I'd say that this low stakes gambling, this kind of, all Finns kind of know these historical gambling machines, and sort of have some kind of relationship with them, has been quite a positive, or has had a positive influence as well. So yeah, I don't know. Hopefully that answered the question.
Thank you. I think there's a question that everyone has in mind, but no one's think about it right now. But I think it's a serious topic that was mentioned several times when we had the FGAMP assembly. is what about contemporary games and games that are like dematerialized, that doesn't have any like when you can't like when you don't have like physical copy of a game nowadays when you are playing online. Well, of course, I already have myself because of like the case of the museum and in Estonia, but like would be interesting maybe to get it from you, like a kind of review of the situation and what kind of challenge it is in terms of preservation, and what kind of perspective you have, and what kind of yes support with cooperation, I guess, with other institutions, thinking about, as I'm thinking, National Library, for example, or so yes, would be interesting to have like some enlightenment of the situation.
It's a good question, and you're completely right, and I think it's a challenge, and it's a problem that we face now, because as you said, with all the games we can have physical copies of them, and you can run them even when the machine is not the platform is not connected to the internet. But nowadays with digital distribution, it's more difficult to kind of control how you exhibit those games, and it's difficult to even get them to run if you don't have an internet connection, and it sort of poses all kinds of problems, because you're not the one who has the control of the game. The company who has the servers that the game needs to connect to has the control, and if the company, for some reason or another, decides to shelf a game, you can't play that anymore. So that's kind of like a legal problem as well, because we as players don't really have ownership of the games that we buy from the company, and museums don't really have the possibility of displaying them, because if the servers are down. So it's a challenge, and I guess it's a challenge related to the situation of sort of server-based games, virtual environments, virtual worlds, where it's the same. And what I touched upon also in the lecture, that there's lots of examples of virtual worlds, of places where people have come together to make all kinds of stuff that simply disappear when somebody who owns the copyrights decides that it's not profitable enough. Supernauts was an example that I had in the slides. That was a game, or rather a virtual world, where players were making their own content. They were making their own levels that others could enjoy. And it was quite successful, and people really liked that, and they enjoyed making this. But it wasn't online that long, because the company who owned the copyrights decided that this is not profitable enough, and then they just closed it down. And that kind of leaves the players who had been making all this content in quite a sort of bad situation, because they can't access that content anymore. They don't really have ownership of what they do. And I think this is going to be a bigger problem each year that goes by, because there's more and more games and words like this in existence. So I think that we need some kind of solution here that kind of sees or takes into account the kind of ownership of culture. The ownership cannot be only a legal or business venture. I think it also needs to be kind of a question of moral rights. Who has the right to live in these virtual places? Who has the right to their playbory, if you want to use a term like that? So this is something that we really need to discuss more, and I think museums here can kind of be part of this discussion, maybe to remind also the companies that the sort of way you do your business at the moment isn't sustainable, because these words are going to go away, and the people who actually made the content are going to suffer for that. So we need to have a big, I guess, ethical, moral discussion related to these legal issues. Yes, I noticed also in the chat there's a nice meme by
Yeah.
Sven Alexander. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. That it's like a diss and also a compliment to Finnish games in general. I guess I can also put it up on screen. Sure.
There's games like Legend of Grimrock, Noita, Baba Is You, Max Payne, My Summer Car, Ultra Kill, Cruelty Squad, etc., etc., which are all Finnish games, and they are known for their difficulty, and that's a yeah, that's that's an interesting observation, I guess, and something that I would agree with. That there's lots of difficult Finnish games.
Yeah, I didn't make it, but that seems to be the consensus on internet forums about Finnish games in particular.
Yeah. And maybe many of these are kind of, well, Max Payne is a very big title, but most of the others are kind of smaller titles, indie games, if you want to call them that. And I guess they have come about from the sort of scene of Finnish pikkupelit, as they were called, like little games in the 90s, where people, weren't really that many publishers of games for the PC, because there had been a market for Finnish games on the Commodore 64 in the 80s, but that had been very short-lived and it closed down. And after that, nobody was really publishing games because Finns were making them, but they couldn't really have or get the connections to the international publishing houses in England and the US, or not that many could. So they were making the games more for themselves and their friends. And people were playing these games like, for example, Unreal World and Propilki that we looked at, or Slicks and Slide, or all kinds of like Finnish indie games in the 90s. And they were developed in many cases for dozens of years, as we heard. And every new version kind of honed the play experience, and it made it better, but often also more difficult, because people were playing these games for years and years and years, and they were having fun, they were getting better. And I think these games that you are showcasing here are a kind of like descendant of that. People were used to these games that were made for the community, by the community, and there was a very close relationship between the game maker and the people playing it, and there was a kind of um, a sort of exchange of ideas and what should be in the game. And these are kind of in one way based on that, on a sort of game culture like that. And it seems to resonate also internationally. People like these games, they buy them, and they see something special in this sort of hardcore-ness, this sort of, because these are games that are kind of made outside of the commercial game industry. These are made by very small teams, or even one or two people. So I guess it's a way to sort of, these games are maybe natural for Finns because they grew up with them. They kind of understood what that games like this can also be fun. They can be something that you enjoy, and maybe now with Steam and digital distribution, it's also possible to sell them to other parts of the world, and I think that's super fun.
I see. That's pretty cool. Thank you.
Thanks. And again, it's a good example of kind of like a meme having a lot of content. It's really nails the thing.
I would like to somehow like put back the. So I don't know if it's a remark or if I would end it up through a question. But like I'm trying to not staying. I don't want to have like this as more like as a meeting between museum owners. I would like to try to explore the side of like put it back to the context of art, in a way of so I was surprised, like since I started this the idea of running a video game museum. So first I would like to say that indeed thinking video games through the context, so as you were describing at the beginning, is probably one of the most important things that would connect, I think, art and video games in a way that Estonia doesn't have the same background. So it's very hard to find materials like pictures, literatures about the video game situation at that time, and as well as, of course, as you know, like it was mostly made from bootlegs, from piracy or knockoff systems. So what is very important is the context, and it's the testimonies of that period. So that would give like a clear picture. But it's interesting that if we are waiting too much, that history could totally disappear. But it's not the point I want to focus on. But it's funny that since I started this idea of having museum, when I was exploring a bit the questions that was coming out from other people working like on the same problematics, for me it was a bit funny that the main questions of technical and display was actually already things that was I had the feeling that people like people thinking the video game the exhibition design has like are discovering the technical aspect of exhibiting digital technology or electronic or but like if we think back in time, if we take for example Fluxus and first installation of artists like Nan Junpei or artists like maybe I think you know Nan Junpei, that was making this sculpture from TVs that was from or John Cage with sound installations so we are in the 70s and 80s, and it gave like a huge challenge for museum, for institution with the first art centers or museum exhibiting modern art or contemporary art. There was and there is still today like a huge challenge how to preserve, how the installation, the artworks, the sculpture can sustain the time, and as well how to survive, how the technology could survive the updates as well. When we think about installations that was developed on computers from the 80s, 70s, there was already the question already 20 years ago about how to exhibit in museum displays that needs abandonware, needs OS systems that nowadays are not possible or with difficulties to put to recreate the experience as it was 20 years, 30 years before. And that's why I'm very glad, for example, I sent the link for the students about FGAMP, but recently, like it was 2 years ago, I think, or a year ago, I forgot, ZKM in Karlsruhe joined FGAMP. And for me, I think it was a big move, because that's exactly the problematics that what the ZKM was already trying to put to Enlight, but of course they were not the only ones. But so where I want to end up with that. So yes, so what I'm thinking is that are you already aware, or is the other structure or institutions working with this idea, these problematics, and this ambition, and this plan of preserving video games and recreate experience from the past? Do you think that it's already known, all what I already described, and it's a kind of something that haven't been made in perspective yet, or it's already established, there is already cooperations with these institutions? And do you think, or is it something totally different that needs different tools to complete this research and this plan to preserve video games or to exhibit video games? And is there like a dialogue that must be installed to share the experience and complete what is currently happening in interactive design preservation? Very long question. Sorry. I hope I was clear. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and there definitely is a connection, and it's the same problems that we're dealing with, but I don't think there's been that much discussion between media art preservation or conservation and game preservation, or not maybe enough discussion
Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, if I think about the situation in Finland, there's only one school in Helsinki, the Metropolia School of Applied Sciences, that is nowadays educating conservationists, and they have now had one group of students who have specialized in digital conservation and media art conservation, and there's starting to be a demand for people like this, people with skills about preserving media art, because also Finnish art museums have that in their collections, and they are kind of like a problem, and nobody really knows what to do with them. So I think it's interesting that we now start to have conservationists that have this kind of background and skills to maybe tackle the issues. Some of those conservations also have had an interest in our museum, in the game museum, and I think I'm hoping that in the years to come that we can have fruitful discussions about the similarities but also differences, because I think there's also differences between game history and media art preservation. In media art preservation, the sort of question of the original is much more important, I think, than in games, because, well, if you would present like the TV installations that we just talked about, the Namjoon Pike TV installations on modern flat screens, it wouldn't be the same. The actual TV monitors are part of the artwork, and sort of there you need to kind of have those monitors to show the artwork, or you would need to get, I guess, very similar or identical ones to present that. And we all know that old technology ages, and maybe in 20 years it will be very, very difficult to get monitors like that, or even now it can be very difficult to have that. And to some extent it's the same question in games. If you want to play the original game, you need to have the original monitors and the original keyboards and the original tape drives, etc., etc., etc. But I don't think that's the only way that we can enjoy these games. We can also emulate them, and in some cases it's completely fine. We don't need to kind of step back in time to understand why a game was played or why it's important. We can also play a modern version of it, a modern emulation or a modern PC. And that's I guess, okay. It's not the perfect, but it's perfect solution, but it's okay. Especially if we have, for example, photographs of the original environments where the games were played. If we can kind of show that this is maybe this Commodore 64 game was maybe played in a room like this, and that was the tape drive that you needed to load the game from, and that was the monitor, etc. Now we're playing in a different environment, but still we can kind of understand what it's about, and we could understand what it's about even without playing by just reading, I guess, magazine reviews from the time or looking at screenshots. So we don't always need to play to understand. But in the art context, it's different because experiencing it in the original form is kind of the point. Of course, we can explain that the artworks of Nam Yuen Paik on monitors are important for this and this and this reason, but art is made for sort of physically being looked at and experienced in a specific place, in a specific environment and also institution. So if you take away that, you maybe lose a lot from the original art, from the meanings of the artwork, and that is important. I don't think it's that important in the context of games. Of course, it would be nice to have like hundreds of really old machines and be able to show everybody who comes to the museum that this was the way games were played and this was the specific joystick that you had. But I don't think it's we need to have that. So yeah, I guess long answer to long question. Maybe I did answer some parts of that, but it's a huge question and something that we need to discuss more and need to sort of have more of a dialogue also with the art field.
Definitely, and I think it's as well touchy topic as that would, if we would come deeper as well, we would arrive to the problematics of about definitions, like what is a video game or what is what we can consider as an artwork.
Yes.
Theoretically, I mean, and because like exactly as you said, like video games with this problematic of, well, of course there is a lot of of example that would illustrate the contrary of this idea of the unicity in the history of art, that it depends the artist practice as well. But like if we take like of course a very stereotypically Warhol, somehow like he played a lot with this notions of unicity, unique, what is defining the artwork as something unique. But definitely, like for sure, how if we are comparing video games to something, I think it's mostly close to a product. In terms of like when we look at it in the video game industry, it's a product. So something which is much more close to design, interactive design, than what we would consider as a work of art from the, I would say, like the epinal that we like, the representation that we have in mind. But that would be much more problematic.
Totally agree, and maybe if I can just add here a little bit, I think like, yeah, games are commercial products, but I think what is specific to our museum is that we not only look at them as products, we also look at them as a sort of social social history and
Yes.
look at the people and the ways that they are played. But yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, it's necessary to as well study. That's why I was talking about the context is probably even more important than the video game itself, like to understand in the context of history, like probably summoning tools like anthropology or sociology to read, and as well. There is probably as well not one history of video games, because there is the history of video games in our Occidental part of the world, but we were not consuming the games the same way if we are in South America, if we are in Baltic states, if we are in Russia, when it was in the Soviet Union and after Soviet Union, so yes, there is so many. When you are in Asia, it was again like when you look in different parts of the world, like the spectrum of games that was developed and was branded is like officially or not officially was absolutely a total different world. So, of course, what is make I think the point of the museum in Tampere is as well like the focus of what. Of course, it's the mission as well, I guess, of the museum is as well to reveal the local context, which is we cannot talk or show everything. There is a decision of like it needs a focus of the curation in the curation. But I would like to come back as well, like on some elements that you were talking, how to give the experience on the games, like how we will play the games, not in 5 or 10 years, but like in 50 years or in a century. So definitely the emulation will be a way of preserving the code. So that's why as well the work that you established with this and with the help of Andreas Lange about UNESCO to protect the Demoscene is already like a huge step that will give, I think, some elements to going with that. But once that I share Carl Terrien link, it's because I remember, I think it's from a lecture that Carl Terrien gave. So he's a specialist as well in video game history. And he mentioned as well a way that one of the way how we will save the games are what the players are. So it's not only about like quantity of data that are legal or not, that are downloaded on some hard drives everywhere in the world. But what is interesting is some games probably will not be able to be playable on the original device in the future. And maybe YouTubers so one of the most influencing one, which is Angry Video Games Nerd, Cine Massacre, that probably that kind of videos where you have, even if it's in a comedy style, when they are describing the way how you are playing the game, what's the description of the frustration, the reaction of when you push the button and what's happening on the screen. So all these descriptions of gameplays will probably be part of that legacy, part of the history of that game that will help maybe to understand a game that is not possible to play anymore. I found that it was as well like an interesting point that Carl Terrien noted about that. So it's not a question actually.
Again, I agree, and people are making these videos anyways for their own fun or for profit, even if they're professional streamers. But I think something that we also can or should maybe take into account here is that museums could also make those videos. And I think there was a very interesting project by the Sound and Vision Museum in the Netherlands, where they invited people over to the museum to play old games, and they recorded that, and they recorded not only the screen like on a stream, the screen like on when somebody is streaming, but they also recorded the people and how they interacted when they played that game, and how they interacted with the controllers and with each other, and I think it was very interesting project to sort of take this type of approach to game preservation, and to actively also push that medium in a different direction than what the streamers are doing by themselves, because the museum is an active part in preservation. The museum can kind of put the focus on a different thing. The museum, when it does this, they can say that, okay, this is an interesting way of preservation, but we could maybe we should focus more on the actual people and their interaction between each other, and museum can make a video like this.
Guys, any more questions? Okay. Well, I could keep going with remarks or questions, but I think we made a large tour of. Sven?
No, nothing. Just turning my camera back on.
Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. I would say that, like, if you have some maybe aftermath, after thinking about all this discussion, maybe I would suggest you can maybe ask the question to Niklas, as you have his contact. Thank you very much, Niklas, for this talk.